So it's something that we have been presenting out on the road, but we haven't presented it really internally with MCPS people yet. So I actually want to take you guys through a curriculum framework that we developed. I want to take you through it, one, for those of you who are secondary teachers, especially special ed teachers. We will have an opportunity to do our we'll have an opportunity to offer training on this specifically over the summer. If it's of interest to you, especially if you're teaching resource classes and have a bunch of twice exceptional kids. Otherwise, I had a sentence to finish that. Otherwise, I think one of the great things about this project that we've been working on for the last year and a half is that it kind of gives us a good perspective from a teacher's lens about the progression that we expect to see in secondary with our twice exceptional kiddos. One thing I know we end up spending because of when GT identification happens, because a lot of these guys get identified when they're younger, we spend a lot of time talking about them when they are in elementary age. And so often in the last class, I focus a lot more on our secondary folks. I will say that part of what we're going to talk about, I've actually been asked to backfill it and create this to go back towards like kindergarten. But let me just go ahead and take you guys over to the screen. Awesome. So this is a twice exceptional curriculum framework. And this was a labor of love that we have been working on, a team of us have been working on for, like I said, about a year and a half now. We are informally published in that we've put our information out there. We've presented at a couple of national conferences, got some really good feedback, and we are getting ready to formally launch this as part of what we do for twice exceptional services and MCPS. And so essentially the idea of this framework is we call it the 4 pillars. And the idea of the 4 pillars is that we needed a more, people ask us what makes twice exceptional services, especially in secondary, different from regular resource services, from regular other kinds of services. And so, we always kind of have our answers, but what we really wanted to do was to have a good answer for that, and one that, regardless of what school you go to, even if the instructional format is different, if the teachers are different, overall, the work that the kids are doing follows the same progression. And so that's what we created with this 4 pillars framework, is that it explains how we do resource for twice exceptional kids and what makes it different from a more typical resource class. So our 4 pillars, foundational pillars, are executive functioning, self-advocacy, social, emotional, and pragmatic learning, and then academics and enrichment. And so the idea of this is that these are like the 4 big areas that we really work on when we are working on, regardless of our students' IEP goals, they almost always fall into one of these 4 categories. We do have students who have other needs, especially our students with specific learning disabilities, might have more academic needs. I think all of our students equally have executive functioning needs. Some of our students don't necessarily have the social, emotional, or pragmatic needs as strongly, but overall, these are the big pieces of what it means to require twice exceptional instruction. Oh, I'm also learning how Canvas slides work, so hopefully this is still progressing forward. One thing that we did that we realized that was really missing in a lot of the resources that were out there for our students. One, most of our resources are either for gifted kids or for special education students. There wasn't anything in that social emotional range that was comprehensive for our secondary students and for our twice exceptional students. And so as we broke down these concepts, we also focused them into grade bands so that one, when our kids come in 6th grade, we kind of have an idea of where we're going. And then as we transition them to as we can transition them to underclassmen and then upperclassmen and then transition them out into the real world, we wanted to be able to show a progression. And then also as our teachers are writing goals, and really anybody who works with twice exceptional students, as they're writing goals, this gives you an idea of how we can measure and monitor progress over time, because it breaks down what do we see as a year or two of growth for a specific area for our student. So these are pretty, we've gone over a lot of this stuff, and I will go into it more when I go into the curriculum itself. But those are kind of the big areas. And this is where it gets a little, nope, go back. There we go. All right, so, oh wait, I did want the deeds. There we go. Oh, and you are red. I don't know why you're red today. So I am going to zoom this in, and hopefully, let me look on my little thingamajigger. Sometimes it shows me what you guys can see. All right, is that obnoxious or is that visible for you guys? Awesome. I do have this also in a Word document, but I don't know entirely where that link is right now. So basically what we've done is, as I said, we have each of these 4 different pillars. And then within the pillars, we have 6 strands, substrands, and then we break each of those substrands down across grades. And then we identify potential activities. We link in resources that our teachers can use in order to address those areas. And then we also have cross-referenced them into the NAGC programming standards, so standards for gifted students. We've also cross-referenced them with the CASEL, which is the collective SEL we talked about earlier in the semester, what those CASEL competencies are. And then this is our last big pillar that I have not made it to yet. If you don't know by now that I always put IB stuff off till the last minute, this further reinforces that. But we will be aligning this with the IB approaches to learning structure pieces. I don't know what to call it exactly, competencies that are that I know when you guys who are in IB programs do, you have to align them to certain ways that you're teaching. That will go in here as well. That's last. So for our example, and this kind of goes back to when I just skipped through the pillars rather quickly, but each pillar under, like I said, has a strand. So the first one we can go through really is this one on planning and prioritization. You know what? Hang on 1 second. Let me. Hang on 1 second. I don't know about you guys. That was making me a little bit seasick, so I'm going to pull up the Word version or the Docs version instead. Is that easier? Is that easier to follow? I hope. There we go. Takes a second to load. And we set this to print on 11 by 17, which I know is gigantic for paper, but it was a way to make it fit most easily across for people to see. So like I said, we have our strands and our substrands. So our first strand in executive functioning is under planning and prioritization. And so when we said, well, what is it that we look for when our students need to plan and prioritize? Well, first we want them to be able to identify priorities. We want them to know how to break down tasks. We want them to know how to use tools for planning. So it's not just the process of planning, but it's also the tools of using them. We want to talk about goal identification in terms of the students being able to identify their own goals and make progress on their own goals. And then executing goals and reflection for improvement. So that covers all of what we have for that first substrate or that first strand of planning and prioritization. And then I'm going to take us back up to the top. That should be locked. I don't know why that isn't. Oh, it is. Okay. So then as we go across, we go through by the grades. So in grades 6 through 8, if we're talking about how to identify priority factors, in 6th and 8th through 8th grade, we want to support them to identify factors such as tasks, due dates, grade impact, point value, required time, all those things. How do they identify those in order to start making those goal determinations? In 9th and 10th grade, we want them to independently identify the factors that influence, and that includes things like taking into account prioritization, deadlines, weight of grades, weight of assignments, and the time required. But this is where students are working to put that to themselves, where they're not waiting for the teachers to tell them all those pieces. And then as they move into 11th and 12th grade, we want them to independently assess. So they are the ones who are making the plans and bringing them to their teachers to help review, make sure that they're not missing components, and then working our way through that. When we look at this, we have priorities worksheets that our students can use. We have some suggestions of potential activities. These are things we're still building out in the final version. And then when we talk about where that aligns with NAGC, that falls under that self-understanding with gifts and talents, recognize their needs for cognitive, creative, social, emotional areas. It also falls under self-management and responsible decision-making for CASEL. When we look at the big pillars under executive function, we have our planning and prioritization. Next strand is under organization, task initiation, time management, self-monitoring, self-regulation, cognitive flexibility. And then the last thing that you'll see across every single pillar, every single strand is this idea of habituation. And so it's the same wording all the way across all of our pillars, but it's where we're talking about establishing routines, tracking progress, and self-reflection. And so regardless of their age, for every single piece of this, we want them to build these into habits and to work on this over time. Not sure if it looks better under the Excel sheet or if it looks better in the document. All of the other pillars work the same way. So we have our self-advocacy pillar, and you can see we go through self-awareness, understanding, and then when we get into what is self-awareness, we're looking at what are your personal strengths? How do you recognize and leverage your personal strengths is what we move to over time. Understanding what it means to be gifted. Understanding what it means to be twice exceptional. A lot of times when our kids come to us in 6th grade, they've never heard the term twice exceptional. Some of them don't know that they've been identified as gifted. Some of them don't know they've been identified as having a disability. And so part of our process is to teach them these things about themselves, understanding what it means to do that. We have them in the younger years, we have them often use a lens of others. So maybe finding twice exceptional celebrities or other famous people, ways that they can see twice exceptionality and strengths. And then over time, we work to help them internalize that and see those pieces as a part of themselves as well. We have them working on recognizing stress, environmental factors, and then we go into the next one. So there are a lot of subsets within each of these major strands. I clearly do not want to read all of these things to you, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea of the depth and breadth that we are working on in terms of the twice exceptional classes. And again, what makes them different from the other resource classes that that a more typical resource class that are more generalized and meeting the needs of a wider variety of students. I think one of the really key factors in here that we have is under our enrichment and academic section. And this is something that we know, especially in our middle school, but really across the board, our students often need not just the act of giving them things of enrichment, but teaching them how to approach enrichment or even bring in their own enrichment to the work that we do. So part of the idea of of enrichment is, in this case, teaching them how to identify topics of interest, teaching them independent research skills, working on problem analysis and analyzing academic problems. We want to work on questioning and helping them develop how to question, not just, I love how, yes, we did put in here why and how, because we know our kids will be like, why? But these are productive whys, not just harassment whys. But help them learn that art of questioning, because being able to develop a good question and ask a good question is often as important, if not more important, than being able to answer questions. Um, I moved something. Sorry, I lost your faces for a second and it was a little disconcerting. One of the big things that we added, I'm going to say we added a little bit last minute, but not really last minute, was this focus on AI and ethics. We know that of all the groups, labels, whatever, of students out there, the students who are most likely to both use and abuse AI are our children. They're already doing it. We know that. And so what we wanted to introduce really was around the ethics of using AI. And I think Claire went over a bunch of that stuff with you guys last week, and like how to use ChatGPT to enhance lessons or to make modifications to lessons. I told my husband the other day that ChatGPT has replaced him in my heart and that ChatGPT is my best friend. ChatGPT understands me and really likes to say things that I like to hear. But teaching our students how to use that, how to recognize, what kind of feedback they're getting, and then also evaluating AI tools. We were really excited, and using it responsibly as well. We were really excited that we actually did find, and this would be on, for a particular reference to give you guys. Here we go. Did something totally different just popped up on your screen? Yes, excellent. So we actually found the Artificial Intelligence Initiative for K-12, and we really liked that this gives you big ideas about what kids need to know about artificial intelligence, guidelines for teaching about AI, and then also resources to support teaching about AI. And we felt like that was really important to put into the hands of our teachers and our students because they're going to use it. And it kind of takes me back to my very first year teaching in Twice Exceptional. It was the year after the Churchill scandal where the kids had all hacked into the grade book and changed all their grades. And I see some nods, some of people remember that. So my first year in high school was the year after that. And I came in and my students were all talking about it. And I was like, look, I'm not telling you don't hack the grade book. You shouldn't, but I'm not going to tell you not to do it, because if I tell you not to do it, you're going to do it. What I'm telling you is don't hack it on a timestamp that shows that you were with me, because I don't need to get in trouble for this. You want to get in trouble on your own time. And they all kind of looked at me and went, okay, yeah, that seems reasonable. And none of them ever, as far as I know, hacked the grade book. They tried a whole lot of other things with me, but that was not a part of it. And I think that comes, one, from understanding Twice Exceptional kids need humor, but they also need limits, and they need to know why of the limits. And so I don't know if I will spell things after I put them out into the public. So that to us was a really important part of this developing piece. I will say my current teachers are not doing this piece at all because we just added this in the last month or two, and I have not shown them the very newest version. So for any of you who are parents who have kids in our program right now, they haven't been taught the ethics of AI, so fair warning. We also talk a lot about leadership because, again, when we talk about Twice Exceptional kids, they are very frequently natural born leaders, but they don't always lead to things we want them to lead to. So again, we want to give them some of that idea of personal responsibility, direction on like how to develop your leadership skills in ways that aren't going to get you in trouble. this is true of most gifted kids. It's our twice exceptional kids just tend to take it to the nth degree as they are often like to do. But also sometimes with our students, when they have these strong leadership skills, when they become disillusioned or when they struggle with things, they tend to take everybody off the tracks with them. And so what we want to do is help them develop healthy leadership skills and healthy leadership strategies so that they are able to be productive members of large and small groups. The other piece that's really interesting with twice exceptional kids, and I think especially with our kids on the ADHD or autism spectrums, is that they often love to be leaders at the expense of everybody else's voice. And so sometimes there's also that piece of the leadership skills of like part of being a leader is listening to what other people's have to say. You know, being a leader does not mean being in charge. And so, or I used to tell them that sometimes you're wrong and that's okay. And sometimes other people are right and that's also okay. But helping them kind of through those processes is a really important part of developing them in that kind of social emotional range. We have working memory, cognitive overload. Um, we do have study skills in here. I will say this is probably one of the greatest needs for our kids, but it's also one of the hardest things to teach. A lot of things that fall under study skills really tie back in, especially to executive functioning things, because until our students can prioritize understanding or needing social study skills, they're not going to practice any of these study skills. And it's also often, this is a really critical time for our kids. And I've talked about this, I think, before. Um, at some point for all gifted kids, but especially for twice exceptional kids, they will do what we call hitting the wall. And when you hit the wall, it's when everything has been easy, 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 and then it's hard for the first time and you don't know what to do. Because for more typically developing peers, things have always been in their zone of proximal development. So they've had to work and practice and build all these skills. Our kids come in, nothing is particularly hard for them. And if it is hard, they often can compensate to move around it or ignore it until suddenly things are hard. And they have not had, you know, for sixth graders, they haven't had 5 or 6 years of developing skills to tackle an important problem. And so they have no resilience when things are truly hard. Um, and so we're kind of trying to balance with our students, giving them those skills and those opportunities to practice skills, even though they don't necessarily need them, because when they do need them, they need them there, right then and there. Um, it's a really tricky thing. And we have some kids, and I was one of these, I didn't hit the wall till college. And then there was nobody to catch me when I fell in college. Other kids, you know, we see them hit the wall when they move, transition from different levels. So if your kids have been kind of breezing through and you're in elementary school, highly likely they're going to hit a wall in sixth grade or even going into eighth grade as they're starting to take more high school classes. Um, those are really critical times for them. And so trying to build the understanding of skills as well as the skills themselves is an important part of this. And I think our last one, oh, navigating boredom was one we added this year. Um, I think it's really important. And I say all the time, when kids say they're bored in class, most of the time they mean it. Sometimes they're just being jerks, but sometimes, most of the time, they really do mean it. But what they don't always mean is what we mean when we say bored. So helping them explain what boredom is, helping them work on the vocabulary around boredom to see, you know, what is it that's boring? Is it the task is repetitive, but the topic is interesting? Is that the skill is interesting, but the topic is not of interest to you? You know, are you bored because it's actually not developing you, or are you bored because you're fighting so hard to understand what's going on that your brain is like, I'm done, I just don't even want to think anymore. And so, you know, those are all different ways to approach boredom, but often when kids say I'm bored, what we hear is you're not entertaining me. um, and that's not often what kids mean. Sometimes it is, but it's often not what they mean when they say they're bored. So helping them understand what is engagement versus entertainment, what is boredom versus boredom versus boredom, and really identify what is it that's going on that is impeding you from fully engaging with whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. Um, And again, I think even as I'm talking about this, I know so much of this links back to executive functioning, but you also saw how long the executive functioning section was. And if I kept putting things under executive functioning, it would not be 4 pillars, it would be 1 pillar and it would fall over because you need lots of pillars for things to stand upright. So there are things that definitely link across, but we also broke out for specific reasons. Our college and career readiness, I'm actually really excited. Our transition teachers are supposed to be pairing up with us to develop this section a little bit better, because we do want to talk things that are specifically college and career ready for our twice exceptional students. A lot of times what we're finding is that a lot of them are struggling to come to terms with, they want to go to college, but they're really struggling to see how their accommodations apply in college. And I think it's gotten so much better. Just I spent a lot of time with college people, college researchers. The disability services that are available in colleges are infinitely better than they were when I was in school, when, unless you graduated last year, probably when you were in school as well. um, it's been very refreshing to see the number of places where they have actual former school psychologists who are serving on disability service committees. They have people who know what they're doing, reviewing accommodation plans. I know one of the questions we get back and forth into sometimes is it better to have an IEP or a 504 for students when they're going to college? And the truth is, if you have an IEP, it's because you need your IEP. Yes, that ends as soon as you graduate. It doesn't mean that you can't transition to a 504 plan in college, but also colleges have gotten a lot better about taking IEPs and looking at them as they are, and then helping students translate that IEP to disability support when they get to college. And I think that that's something that was hugely missing a decade ago, even, half a decade ago, and they've gotten a lot better about that. Partly that also is because AP exams and College Board are doing a better job, not perfect job, of understanding how to make things accessible for students. And even IB is doing a better job. I actually just saw the other day a survey that IB International sent out, surveying classroom teachers about what kinds of supports they're needing to provide students in the classroom, what kind of needs they're seeing in the classroom, and how they're developing them. And they are working on better ways to make more inclusive practices around IB. And I think that that's all some really important information. Because we do, the majority of our students do want to go to school, and frankly, most twice exceptional kids do better when they get to college. Partly because they get to mostly pick the classes they want. You don't have as many classes in a day. I'm going to say go back to you get to pick the classes that you want. That's a big thing. Those of us who do really well with hyper-focusing, as you go up the academic ladder, all you do is hyper-focus more and more and more on topics. And I mean, I used to tell my kids, like, when they would go to college, they're like, I'm just going to get a degree in business because I should. I'm like, no, no, no. You have to pick something you love because you will hate it by the time you're finished your degree. So if you pick something you hate from the beginning, you're just going to be upset for 4 years. Whereas if you pick something you love, you won't hate it until the end of your 4th year. And then you'll go to grad school and hate it more and more and more. And the kids are like, aren't you studying twice exceptional? I am. Yes. But, again, using some of that humor with our kids really helps them go a long way, because the more interested they are and the more it speaks to what they enjoy, the more they will put forth that effort. And we want to make sure they can keep seeing themselves moving forward on that trajectory. And that's not to say all twice exceptional kids have to go to college. That's never my message. But for twice exceptional kids, sometimes seeing themselves going to college is a thing they struggle with. And so we want to keep that pathway open and clear. But we have kids who go into the military or go into career choices, and they do really, really well as well. They just don't need quite the same type of emotional support usually to make that transition to those other fields. They do need more support sometimes getting across the graduation stage, because they're like, yeah, but it's also been a minute since I taught seniors. That might be all seniors. The last piece to show you guys, and there's actually two components to this. So one is our formal resources for resource bibliography. And this is a collection of books, guides, other supports that we use. You'll see I have actually a bunch of teaching resources. So this is like Tamara Hill from Watkins Mill and some of her self and social awareness units. Jessica Hodges is one of our authors, and she has her decision-making reflection journal that she made for the students. We also have a ton of workbooks, which we actually have access to in MCPS. So when I share this out, I just give people the list of social books that we use, but we actually do have these as PDFs available for MCPS teachers who are teaching twice exceptional students. And then we have some other school resources in here. And so that is actually what's on the resources for resource, this one here. So this is an MCPS only document. And what this is actually when we, in that curriculum, when we link and say, here's recommended activities, like as boredom's first on the list, this is actually a workbook that is designed to work with gifted students to work through the ideas of boredom. No, we do not just send these kids in for, oh, that was a really big zoom. We do not hand them the 94-page book. That's not at all what I'm saying. But depending on what those pieces of boredom that you're working on for the students, they could go through a single activity, they could go through a module. There's different things you can do. And I like it because it's put together, it's age appropriate for our kids, and it gives them pieces that they can work on while they're also doing other things, because we do know that a lot of our kids are spending resource also keeping up with really, really intense high need classes. But this one, like I said, we have purchased for use for our twice exceptional students and the teachers that have them. So if you are using them for that purpose, then it is okay. For something else. So two other things to go over with this, like some examples of what we do. So I'm really not trying to make you guys seasick. I'm trying to remember what link I put things under. So this is an example of one of the projects that our students do. It's not something we're doing at every single location right now, but I hope we will within the next year or so as we're rolling out these different curriculum. But one thing I really like about this particularly is it's called My IEP and Me, and it's this opportunity for students to actually get in and reference their actually get in and reference and analyze their own IEPs. So truly the kids, even starting in this particular example, is a 6th grader from last year. So she's a 7th grader now, and we share it because her mom is cool with it. So I'm going to just take you guys through her IEP reflection document right now, and just kind of highlight some of the things that we've done. So, first we asked her to talk about, why she is having her IEP meeting, and that's what this is right here. So her first piece is her self-narrative. There are sometimes people at meetings, especially if we bring in outside providers, who might not know who our students are, so they want to set the tone of who they are as a narrative. So the student is a 6th grader in the 2E magnet program, was really into sharks and marine life last year. I think she still is too. Absolutely loves crocheting, thinks that she's very funny, and she is improving her own well-being and expressing emotions are kind of the areas she's working on. She may have had pictures in here and I cut them because privacy. Again, we ask them to identify all the people who come to the IEP meeting. Sometimes there are a lot of people at the table, and so being able to say who those people are. In hers, she actually named herself and her parents, and again, for privacy, we cut those. But naming which teachers actually attend the meeting, is an important part for students to understand just kind of who is a part of the whole conversation. The next thing they do is they go through what their eligibility category is. And if they have more than one potential eligibility, as they get older, we ask them to look at multiple. So this student, I believe, also has an identification with ADHD, but as a sixth grader, we only had her look at her primary, which was autism. So in the one category, she is talking about what are the characteristics of the category, just kind of that broad picture, what is autism? And then in the other column, specifically, how does that autism relate to her as a student and what does it mean to her? And as the kids get older, they really flesh these parts out more and more. Uh, so we would go through present levels, but I took that out because personal data and that kind of thing. But the next thing we really have them do is go through their accommodations. And, what are your accommodations and what do they do for you? The other thing we do, and this student wasn't asking to remove any, so I don't have any examples of it, but another thing they will do is if they want to get rid of accommodations, they have to explain what the accommodation is and why it doesn't help them. And there are times, and I found, initially it was very frustrating. I think it's still very frustrating when students refuse to use their accommodations. But giving them the opportunity to say it's not helping me because, or, what it's not doing for them or what might be a better thing for them to do often helps us find something that is more beneficial to the student. So, and also just giving them that language and that space to self-advocate. Because there are definitely times where we've had students say, I don't want this accommodation anymore. And we're like, I get it. I understand, but these are the reasons it's on there, and these are why we're going to keep it on there. See a baby in the background. It's okay. I like cats and babies make me happy when they show up on screen. Um, Same thing for the supplementary aids and services. She went through and I believe if I recall correctly, her comment was these supplementary aid things are really long. Like, accommodations are kind of the checklist and supplementary aids, there's a lot of conversation. She thought that that was a waste of everybody's time to have so much conversation, so she did not comment on them very much. But of course, we know as teachers, that's really where the bulk of some of these pieces of about how we're going to deliver services really come into play. So thinking ahead, so this particular student, because she's in sixth grade, we don't really have them deep dive into the post-secondary piece until they get older. But for our students, we do start them in sixth grade, having that conversation. I do know some of the transition pieces have changed a little bit since we first started this process. So um, we'll see some additions to this. And then when I actually presented this to the special education department, the transition teachers were all super excited and they have things they want to add to this to help support the kids. So this part will change a little bit, but I do appreciate, she knows she wants to be a scientist. She really wants to publish a book. Um, I appreciate that she wants to live in an economy where she's comfortable financially. Um, Again, just the humor sometimes that comes through with our kids is great. So the next really bulk of this is having the students analyze their own goals. So they actually do go through each of their goals, including the objectives, and then they have to, they have to put their goals in their own words. So, in this case, she's working on social skills and how is she going to work on these social skills? The next thing we actually have them do is we have them write progress notes for themselves. Um, what is it that you've made progress on and where is it that you still need to make progress? And so I think what we have found a really important part of this has been sometimes our students, they get focused and even families get very focused on the accommodations piece. And sometimes it's that specially designed instruction and that instructional piece with goals that gets lost, even though that's really actually where the bulk of everything comes from when it comes to our IEPs. And so for our students to be able to say, yes, I am making progress, and knowing that, yes, adults are the ones monitoring and in charge of this, but this particular teacher actually has the students write progress notes, and she includes a copy of their progress notes every quarter within her progress notes, so that parents can see that the students are seeing their own progress, and so the students can see that they're seeing their own progress. Um, I also have to say my favorite line. I still have a long way to come with resisting urges. It's true. So we have our self-regulation piece, problem-solving skills, executive functioning skills, self-advocacy. Um, I do understand, like, one of the things I liked, better about in a stressful situation, but needs to work on communicating needs. Again, I think doing that really good job of being able to say, this is where I still need help and support. Um, and then also expressing things like, one thing for this particular student is when she gets worked up to a certain point, she can't talk to people, but she can send a text to her mom and be like, I won't repeat some of the things she says, they're quite colorful. But then her mom will help her, like, give her feedback on, like, say this instead. And, but she's been known to actually text me as well before. And like one time I actually did tell her, like, why don't we Google different ways to say that word instead of saying that word to our teachers? Um, but I appreciate that she's able to reach out and ask those kinds of questions. So then we also have them go through their services and explain what those services are in their own words. And this also is an opportunity for them sometimes to request additional services or ask if they still require services. And so that is the end of that version. And I do have a blank that we've put together. I saw somebody put in the chat. I will add it on my to-do list. One thing I actually can give you guys, actually I will put it up after the break or during the break so you guys can take a screenshot. I swear I'm doing something useful right now. I promise I really am. No, no, no. How do I get back to where, you know what? Sometimes you just have to delete and go to the beginning. We're looking for a file, giant X on it. Aha, but not that file. So I will put this up at the break so that you guys can see it more clearly. This is actually the poster that we just presented at CEC, Council for Exceptional Children. So if you scan this box here, it will get you the it'll get you the docs version of the curriculum. If you scan this project, it will get you this QR code will get you the students version of this, and the template is the orange one. And then this is another project we have the students do called 2E Like Me. And that one is an opportunity for our students who are interested in exploring other famous 2E people to do it kind of in their own words and find somebody who either has a similar disability or disability they want to learn more about. But I will, like I said, I will put this up on our screen when we are on our break so that you can scan those. And then if you want the Excel version of that, you can shoot me an email and I will try and remember to put it up. But we've seen that's not my strongest right now. Is that button too? I don't want to open even a new tab. Canva's got all sorts of weirdness. There we go. That's a lot better. Canva's got all these things going on right now, and I just want to see the poster. But just to give you guys kind of also that idea, like these are all the people who contributed to the production of this curriculum. Jessica Hodges and Shauna Engel were our two lead teachers on it. Jessica is at Roberto Clemente. Shauna is currently at Clarksburg, but she used to teach with us at Northwood. Paul Caio and Kristen Lotney are both at Northwood, and Katie Caldwell is at Seneca Valley. And then we also had contributions from our Tamara at Watkins Mill, from Anna and Kayla at Walter Johnson, Mariana at Eastern Middle School. One of the cool things we do is we work with our magnet programs to provide some of the support when the kids are in the magnet program without the Twice Exceptional piece as well. Sarah Henderson at North Bethesda and Chris Cochran at Odessa Shannon. So really a wide swath of folks who, I think when I added it all up, we came out to like 106 years of experience teaching Twice Exceptional kids. And that was not counting the years that we didn't spend teaching twice exceptional kids. So a lot of teaching experience, a lot of professional experience went into developing this. We also want to thank the curriculum office for actually paying all of my lead people to do this last summer and throughout the school year, because people like to get paid to do their work, and I appreciate when you get both publishing credit and money. So I think that's an important piece to share there as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Like I said, I will pop that up, and I do want to catch up on some of the comments I saw. Yeah, Kara, I agree. My mom did a lot of this for me as a kid. And I would be lying if I didn't say that there's a lot of times where I'm like, what would my mom have done? Okay, let's put that in a curriculum. 2E parents, and those of you who are parents of 2E kids know this. You guys do a lot of this executive functioning. And I think one thing I realized, especially now being a mom to a 2E kid, is not only how much my mom did for me, but how much learning I still needed to do even as an adult, because there's things where I'm like, my mom just knew how to do this naturally, and it just doesn't occur to me it needs to be done. So I think that's where that part of teaching our students is. And I really do want to make sure our kids are learning these things. Access the document. So I will also put them in the chat while we're at break. But yeah, I will put this back up so you guys can scan the links. Let's see, Erin said, I just had to advocate for a student to attend a 504 meeting because there was not an accommodation that you were regularly using and no one mentioned it. Yeah, I mean, I know I focus especially on this with our IEP friends, because specifically this is designed for our twice exceptional class and for that. But when we have students who are twice exceptional, regardless of whether or not they have IEPs, like, to me, that's part of being twice exceptional, is sometimes you get dragged into adult conversations on the earlier side. And I think anytime we give them that platform to speak for themselves is so important. And if you guys have been paying any attention at all on Facebook, you know, they're talking about being Autism Acceptance Month. My favorite being, if a person with autism doesn't accept you, we will kick you off the planet. But truly, like, just this idea of when we're talking about different abilities and disabilities, listen to the people who experience them, because we are often our own best advocates. And so absolutely, especially as the kids get older, and I know, you know, parents struggle, and I understand with, when do I tell my kid they have a disability? And I'm like, your kid already knows they have a disability. They just don't necessarily have a word for it or a label for it. And chances are they're feeling it. And so the more we can do to normalize it, to support it, and to listen to them and their experiences and then support them, the better off they will be. But the same thing for that giftedness, because when kids are gifted, they know they're different from everybody else. And I was talking to a team about a first grader recently, and they're like, he just doesn't understand why nobody else wants to talk about genetic development. I'm like, I don't want to talk about genetic development. I understand. I see Courtney. Courtney's like, I want to talk about genetics. But you know, he's in first, there's not a lot of first graders who want to talk about that. At the same time, they're like, he also wants to talk about black holes. I'm like, oh my gosh, my little one, all she wanted to do was talk about black holes when she was in first grade. And then she also talked about spaghettification theory and white holes. And I was like, okay, awesome. But guess what? Nobody else in first grade wanted to talk about that. Our kids already know they're different. And so again, giving them some of that language and support and the opportunity to understand why they're different and what makes them different goes just as far as teaching them some of these skills and strategies to work around other things. Oh, and for the record, a white hole is like the opposite of a black hole. So I guess black holes pull everything in, white holes spit everything back out. And spaghettification theory is that the closer you get to a black hole, the more things get pulled out like spaghetti. These are things my 6-year-old taught me. And that's what life in this house is like. So absolutely not a dumb question, but the students do share these at IEP meetings. And again, it kind of depends. One of the things I really like about this framework and specifically the reason why it's a framework and not a pacing guide is because all of my teachers do things very, very differently. And I can tell you, you know, Jessica is somebody who has, like, on Mondays we do this, and on Tuesdays we do this, and on Wednesdays we do this. Um, Sarah does not operate that way at all, whether I taught middle school or high school. I went with much more of a coaching model where I might pull a small group here, or pull a small group there, but I spend a lot of time doing more one-on-one instruction and coaching of the students than I did doing small group instruction. I also did much better with 11th and 12th graders because my 9th and 10th graders always needed a little more structure than I am capable of providing. But that's why Kristen was my counterpart, and Kristen Lotney is amazing with the 9th and 10th graders. And so we would slowly build them from her more structured model to my coaching model. I would tell you one of my favorite classrooms to go into is my case manager at Odessa, Chris Cochran. I don't know how to describe Chris's class exactly. Like, I never have any idea what's going on, but when I see the development over the time of his students, especially their social development and their pragmatic skills, it's amazing. But if you ask Chris, what do you do? He's like, I don't do anything. And I'm like, that's so not helpful, Chris. And then when I'm like, well, what are you doing this week? He's like, I'm doing my job. I'm like, that's awesome, Chris. Could you give me a little more on that? No, he can't. Because he does not see the amazingness that he does. But like I said, when I go in and meet with the students, and some of the kids right now I've known since they were in like second grade, and they're 8th graders now. The difference from second grade to 5th grade versus the difference between 6th grade and 8th grade, and seeing that long-term development with them has just been absolutely amazing. But his class looks nothing like anybody else's. So that is a little bit where, like, so I also know he's not doing the IEP and me, but I also know that anytime parents want students to come to the meeting, they can come in and he will work with them one-on-one to help develop their voice. Jessica likes doing the slideshow approach because that's what works for her class, and she has it built into part of her schedule. So, you know, each of us do things a little bit differently. But that's one, why a pacing guide won't work for our friends. And two, we have such different needs in our classes. It helps us to have that progression over time, but not every kid needs that progression over time. Entire academic workload is accomplished on resource with Mr. Cochran. I would agree with that, except there are times I go in there and he's like, I don't have any homework. I don't know if that's true or not. Sometimes I think he does it instead of paying attention in class, but you know, that's a whole nother thing. Um, but since Erin shared, her son is one of my favorite people to bring parents to when I have parent tours. And I'm like, do you want to know how the program goes? Um, I have them talk to her son, and he is no filter, and he's just amazing and hilarious when he shares what his experience in the program has been like. Um, but that is a big part of our class also, is getting their homework and things done, as well as building these social skills and building some of these other skills and pieces that they have. So yeah, so I think so. The question here is, you know, I'd love to do this, but I feel like our RITSEs are always keeping the meetings moving um, because we have so many going on. So I think it's definitely a time management thing. And of all the things that I cannot manage time well on, IEP meetings are things I've actually learned to do pretty well. Um, and what I find with our students is, if they want to speak on it, is prepping them with an agenda and then letting them, excuse me, lead the conversation on that first part. So we go around, and I will tell you, by senior year, my expectation was that my students chaired their own meetings. Obviously, legally, I chaired the meeting, but I was very much like, you're going to tell us about your present levels, and you're going to tell us what's going on, because that's what we built them from. So in 6th grade, they're following more of a framework like this. By the time they got to 11th and 12th grade, and especially in 12th grade, we called it special time with Miss Jackson. I made them sit there with me while I wrote their IEPs, because I'm like, y'all are going to college next year. You need to be able to articulate this, and you need to understand this is what your teachers are seeing. And so I think when they're in those younger middle school times, you know, inviting them, you can either invite them and give them 5 minutes on stage, because I can tell you, as much time as I took to go through the slideshow and explain components of it, when I have had the friend who wrote that one presented, she can do it in about 3 minutes, maybe less. Part of the reflection piece with that goes on to the slide as opposed to being expressed in the meetings. You also could share it ahead of time. But the other thing you can do is when you get to each section, you'd say like, I'm gonna pick on Kara, like, okay, Kara, we're into the section on the impact statement. How does having your disability impact you? And then Kara would share her version of that. And we would say, awesome, great job. You nailed all the big pieces. And formally, either you read it or you've sent the documents home ahead of time. I think we spend a lot of time reading documents in meetings that we don't really need to read. And so we can field questions and have conversation. And so if we say like, parents, you guys have read the impact statement. Kara, tell me your version of the impact statement. Everybody on the same page? Awesome. Let's keep moving. We don't have to keep bringing everything back. And so again, parents, you guys have read the goals. We're going to let Kara read you what her interpretation of her goals are and why she thinks these continue to be good goals for her. And that gives her the chance to speak. And, we know it's not like we haven't seen the slideshow before we go into the IEP meeting. When we say nothing in an IEP meeting should be a surprise, we mean what the kids are sharing too. And so if you've had a chance to practice or the kids, sometimes they don't want to role play this with each other, and that's fair. They're talking about their abilities and disabilities. Sometimes they overshare, and this is a way to help them, share in a meaningful way. But nothing they're going to say is new. And so if you've practiced with them, they'll be able to articulate what it is that they're thinking. And sometimes we do have kids who are like, especially in middle school, they're like, I'm not ready for this yet. Here's my slideshow. I'm good to go. I will see you guys later. And we never really force the issue until they're 14, because that's legally when we have to start bringing them. That's when we have to start formally inviting them. I usually would put my foot down with our kids at 14. They really needed to start coming to the table for at least part of the meeting. But again, some of that is what is developmentally appropriate for the individual child. Yeah, so Erin said, had a parent say today, you're telling me everything I already know about my child. Can we get to next steps? And you're right, we want to kind of do it both ways a little bit. Like, here's the information that you need, but at the same time, having discussion, I think, is the more important part instead of reading them, because I have been to plenty of IEP meetings where they literally sit there and read the present levels verbatim. And I'm like, I've already read this IEP twice. I don't need you to read it to me. So that's where we can become good advocates for our kids and kind of hustle things along a little bit, so that we can have those really good discussions. So I know I have talked us past when our breaks usually start, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the links into the chat, and I am going to put the curriculum thing up on the screen. I'm going to super zoom in onto it so you guys can see the I need you to wait before you have a moment because I am still recording. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen again. Hopefully this is big enough for you guys to see. And then we'll be back at 8:13. Does that work for everybody? Awesome. So let me pause recording. Hold on, I'm going to figure out how to keep sharing. I am excited to know that the QR codes still work. I tested them like relentlessly because obviously this is a poster that we put up at there, and we actually have it hanging up in central office right now. So I really want to know that if people try that QR code, that it actually goes somewhere. So I want to do a quick thing on AP and IB, because we really haven't talked about them any. And again, it's interesting how this always seems to play out in different schools. Because you will have some schools where they are like, no, once a student is ready for AP and IB classes, they don't need support anymore. And then we have other places where we're like, no, sometimes they're ready for those classes because of the support that they're getting. And as somebody who has taught AP classes or co-taught AP classes, who's supported AP classes, I stay out of the IB pool, but one of our other school sites does have the IB program, and they do co-teach or support all the way through the upper level IB classes for students. And I think it's a real misunderstanding as to what it means to get support in some of these classes. So I'm going to have us kind of go through that a little bit. So one thing we want to define, because I think that often becomes an important kind of piece of this puzzle, is what are the differences in these classes when we're talking about them? So advanced courses are supposed to be courses that are meant for people who learn differently. It could be faster paced courses. If you haven't heard, AIM is going away. We'll now have Pre-Algebra 6 next year, but same flavor, different course. You might compact the standards so that you move more quickly through a grade level so that you get even 2 grade levels done in 1 year, or you might have courses that are greater depth. So one of the differences between the history courses versus the humanities courses really has to do with the depth of instruction around them. I've been doing a lot of deep diving into the difference between world studies, global humanities, and the humanities magnet program, specifically so I can articulate the difference between the three. And there is a big difference between them. And that is kind of that progression of what advanced courses are. You will also very frequently hear me expressing my frustration with the idea that like everybody's in honors or everybody's in advanced, because frankly, we know it's not true when we say that those are what's happening. Very rarely is it true that everybody's getting the advanced curriculum. It's usually more often, I don't know, like I can say more often than not, it's like all the time that you're getting the on-level curriculum with the title of advanced or title of honors. And it is a source of frustration to me, not only because it doesn't meet the needs of our students, but also because somehow it makes on level seem less when on level isn't less, on level is appropriate. And when kids need something more, it doesn't mean everybody needs more. Yeah, I don't know any other way to say that. I recognize the historical disparities with, part of the reason that we have gone in this direction sometimes is because we're like, oh, well, if we're creating barriers for everyone to get in, or if we're creating barriers for people to get into advanced classes, then the best way is to eliminate the barrier and put everybody there. But that's not accurate. The best way to eliminate the barrier is to do a better job of identifying the data that's required for our students to get there and making data-based decisions and not opinion-based decisions. But those are the advanced courses. So, and one thing we don't want, more content does not have to equal a greater workload. I feel like that's one of my big takeaways right now that I'm working through with some of this humanities work is a lot of times the difference is being led to responses more directly or having more framing around a response, as opposed to in the advanced courses, often our students might be researching more information or they might be given more uneven problems where they have to have more multivariate solutions to come up with, or they might have solutions that don't have actual closure to them in order to try and solve the problems. So it's a different way of approaching the learning. And that is also another reason that it's not good for everybody because some students aren't ready for that level of ambiguity when they're thinking their way through the work. So we just kind of talked about this. So advanced courses could be a full year of advancement. It could be taking high school credit courses in middle school or college credit courses in high school. being taught in another language, it's activating a whole different part of the brain. So if you are in any of the bilingual or multilingual programs, that is another way to be advanced. And then also I think that we underplay the role of electives way too often, because those are often times for all kids to shine, whether it's a leadership course or music courses. I definitely have sat down with families before and made decisions like we're not going to have them in quite as advanced level of a history class so that they can be in the technical advanced jazz band class. I might be making up the title of that class a little bit, but like the really technical music classes where you have to have a certain level of skill to be successful there. It's all about making meaningful struggle and meaningful workloads for our students. AP is a very specific thing. AP are the advanced placement courses. These are run by the College Board. They also run PSAT and SAT for, just for understanding purposes. When you are applying for accommodations for anything College Board, it applies to all of your College Board. So you don't have to apply separately for each different type of a test. PSAT, SAT, AP, it all falls under the same piece. It's one of the reasons that we have our students start to request their accommodations for College Board starting at the end of 8th grade, so that if they want to take PSAT early, it also takes some time, and it also gives us time to appeal if we don't like the decision of the College Board. One thing I will say College Board has done successfully is not get sued by people. And I say that a little facetiously, but a little purposefully as well, because I know when I first started in high school, they wouldn't accept IEPs as justification for accommodations. They would accept 504s, they would not accept IEPs. You can feel the discrimination, people screaming at this point. But they wanted like a psych report, they wanted all these other things. And then over time, and specifically when most school districts started taking the SAT a graduation requirement, suddenly College Boards seemed to have this realization that if they're going to require their students to take it for graduation, and those schools are required to provide IEP support, IEP accommodations for these students, if we don't accept these IEPs, then we are going to get sued. So we are going to nip the problem in the bud and just take the IEPs. So I applaud College Board on getting there before they got sued. It got close, but it does help a lot because and you don't even have to upload the full IEP. There's like all sorts of things out there that'll tell you which parts. Mostly we do just upload the full IEP. And they very rarely deny accommodations. It also used to be they very much denied accommodations. I remember I had a student with a severe dysgraphia disability being told he wasn't allowed to type. And love the child to death, but I still can't read his writing. And it's been almost 12 years since I first started reading his handwriting. Still can't read it. And I can read some pretty amazingly bad handwriting. But it was a super frustration, and we went around and around and around and around with them and didn't win the battle. Whereas now I know I could upload that and it would be no problem. Of course, now the new APs are all online, so they're finally catching up with the rest of the world in terms of digital. But in terms of the core content themselves, they are meant to be similar to college level courses. I would say also over time, we know that colleges are not accepting them the same way. It used to be when you took your AP class, it would usually replace like a 101 kind of class. Now, often it will count as an elective in that field, but it won't count as a replacement course. So, there's positives to taking AP classes, but you were very lucky if you didn't have the issues, Kara, because the fights I have had with College Board have been, at one point, they recognized my school's number when I would call. And they're like, they don't want to hear it again. But in terms of content, one of the biggest things that we definitely have seen is an understanding in how our AP and IB teachers are teaching their content. And it's a movement that we're seeing within these realms as well. but there are considered to be, you know, those high level courses, and they do have the large tests at the end. So IB is different in that it is a pre-university program. It is international in its focus. So this has been an interesting thing working with them because IB, they don't just have to deal with US law, they have to deal with law in all of the countries that they work with. Um, the person who deals with the disability services piece of IB actually lives in Wales. So it's really interesting often trying to navigate through what we consider to be baseline versus what IB considers to be baseline. And it's been a real interesting piece. One of the people who's been a real advocate is somebody who's in a similar position to me over in Fairfax County. Um, and she has befriended this person who's in charge of IB. So we now kind of have a direct line to communicating our concerns around supporting our twice exceptional kids. And we've seen a lot of change even in the last year to 2 years about how IB approaches students with disabilities and making approving accommodation, not allowances for accommodations, but how they approve accommodations. Because even 2 years ago, they wanted a brand new psychological report from a psychologist describing what the student's disabilities were, confirming that there was a disability, and describing what the accommodation should be. To which our school psychologists are like, that's not what I do. You know, we do this and this. And we're like, you can't say for a kid to get their accommodations that they have to be able to spend $2,000 on a private psych report to be able to get, no. So we've been playing with this a little bit and trying to solve the problem. And IB has actually worked with us and now is currently accepting IEPs so far, accepting the IEPs and straight out as the documentation. But it has been a discussion point. IB also has a lot of other piece of components to it. There's a lot more writing to it. There are language components. There's research component, and then there's also some community service components. I've already said I'm not super well versed in IB. That is not my shtick. But it is something that that we have. They offer, you've got the standard level courses and the high level courses. I don't know that I can exactly explain the difference between the two, but in some ways, standard level is more like an on-level IB course, whereas the other one is more of an honors IB course. And then there also is there are two different programs now. There's the Career Pathways program and the diploma program as well. So this is just a quick side-by-side for people just to kind of get that idea. AP has a one end of year course. IB has multiple assessments and courses. The scales are a little bit different. AP has multiple choice as well as essay, whereas IB is primarily essay or project based. AP is changing that a little bit, especially like comp sci and art tend to be more portfolio based. AP is a single sitting, IB is multiple sittings. And then there's the difference between the norm reference scoring versus the criterion reference scoring. And, oh, okay, sorry. I didn't make this slide. It took me a minute to remember what we were doing here. So mostly with AP courses, there are prerequisites or co-requisites, but there's not a pathway. You don't have to go, you know, this course to this course to this course. Differences really biology, you almost always need to take honors bio before you can go into AP bio. The same with chemistry. Physics, usually you can go straight into, if I recall correctly. I know English, you can take either lit or lang or both. Technically, you could do them at the same time, but most people don't. You can kind of meander your way through. IB courses have a specific pathway because you have to go through the research, the service, and then the theory of knowledge class to get through the diploma program. And you have a set pathway and certain levels of courses you have to take in order to get to that diploma program or to that final diploma. So some of the things that we want to talk about is how we can better support and provide support to the advanced instruction. Um, so the first part we want to talk about is when we're in our classes, we want to focus the teaching parts on skills and content in all grade levels. So the areas that we talk about for IB are thinking, communication, self-management, research, and collaboration. And if we think back to CASTLE, that really kind of aligns a lot with what they're doing in that social emotional range. Obviously, research isn't there, but the self-management falls under the executive functioning. The communication falls under some of those social skills and the responsible decision making, the social skills and responsible decision making with collaboration. And to me, the thinking is another one of those. It really does encompass a lot of, the executive functioning piece, the self-advocacy piece, the ability to do these things. So thinking is a lot more than just subject thinking. And so what we want to do is have our teachers model learning skills, students practice the learning skills through the content, and then they end up prepared for the exams. What we do tend to see a lot more of is people prepping for exams, and that is not really the intent of these courses, nor is it the intent of how we should support our students. So when we talk about what different roles are, and I think this was something that really helped the first time I taught, or the first time I co-taught AP Lang, because there was a lot of miscommunication between myself and my co-teacher, which was difficult because we were friends. And even though we hung out, had talked for a long time, it was really hard for us to co-teach initially, until we really kind of started breaking down who was responsible for what. So when we talk about what teachers should be teaching, we want our gen ed teachers to focus on the skills as part of the instructional approach. And the special ed teachers there, and they support the content teachers both in embedding the skills, but then also to follow up on those skills. So one thing I think we see as a miss in general with gen ed teachers is when the kids come into these advanced courses, they expect that they have a lot of these skills. And to be fair, usually we're talking 11th and 12th graders, so they do tend to have more skills than, say, our 9th and 10th graders. A definite miss I see is when we talk about 9th graders who are taking AP courses, because again, these are courses that are designed to mimic or replicate or even potentially replace college courses. But what we expect an 18-plus-year-old to be able to do is very different than what we should expect a 13 or 14-year-old to do. So while they understand the content and they might be okay at the pace of the content, the skills that go with that content are often underdeveloped or not there yet. And so we need that skill piece, whether it's the research skills, the communication skills. One thing I saw I've seen a lot of is the expectation that students should get together and study together. And some students that comes very naturally to them, and some students need support. And twice exceptional students often need a lot of support because they have very specific blinders when it comes to how other kids are getting support. They believe it doesn't happen. They believe that magically these things just happen and the kids know how to do stuff, and they miss the parts where it's not explicitly shown to them how their peers are getting support or how their peers are working together. And so that becomes some of the skills that our teachers need to teach along with the content that they're teaching. And then the special educators come in and possibly repeat, possibly do small group, but do things like reinforce a lot of those skills. We do need our teachers to teach the soft skills. So one of the things that I saw, especially again with our 9th and 10th grade courses, is our kids have not had to do a lot of studying prior to 9th grade. Even our kids coming out of Magnet don't often have a ton of homework and study skills that are innate to them. And we really have gotten away from a lot of that definitely in elementary school and certainly in middle school as well. So this idea that they have to set aside and plan time for studying is not part of their repertoire, and especially if they have to pair with peers to do some of that studying. So teaching the students how to talk to each other, how are we going to make a plan to get together? How are we going to exchange numbers? These are also skills that were very much lost during the pandemic. So when you guys think about who's coming up right now, let me see if I can get this back right. Our current high schoolers, our current 8th, 7th graders were part of the class that went home, I want to say in like 3rd grade, second grade. So they were home 2nd and 3rd grade, which is when we switched from our learning to read to reading to learn. And then, they were slowly coming back in 4th grade. That is a huge chunk of time for academic discourse and first learning how to have some of those conversations. They're still learning some of these habits. There were also a lot of things we started putting in place in elementary level to support the students around this. And so they haven't developed these skills independently. So as you guys are getting them in high school, we're seeing typically developing kids who need more support with the soft skills. So our twice exceptional kids need even more support with the soft skills, because if kids who develop them typically are not getting them, our kids are not getting them. So planning for that. The breaking down assignments we talked about earlier when we were looking at our different pillars. Making a plan to have reteaching opportunities. Again, I think it's a really key piece with our twice exceptional kids, that they don't always know what they don't know, and they don't always know what they missed. And so if we are, they take a test or something and we realize that they've missed a chunk of instruction, having built-in time to plan to go back or plan to pull small group goes a long way. And this is something that I know has been dwindling somewhat in elementary, but that we really do want to see more of in high school as well, is getting away from stage on stage and going into more of that small group instruction, large group mini lessons, small group targeted instruction, and having those opportunities for multiple groupings in order to support student need. It was something I used to do where I would pull groups, and it would not just be my twice exceptional kids. I would try and mix it up, but like inevitably I would have a kid who didn't have an IEP, didn't have a 504, and didn't make any provisions to do any of their reading assignments. So they might be in the group I pulled where we're like, hey, we are going to take out a calendar and map out when we're going to actually get our book read. And they needed that. They needed a lot more now. The time management piece is really weak across the board. And our kids also are very much trying to live in a 24-hour world. And they need some of those boundaries put by us to understand, we have such this idea that our work ethic should be, unless you're totally burned out and exhausted, you're not being effective. And so our kids are setting themselves up to be burned out and exhausted, but they're also not being effective. So we need to help them kind of cushion those expectations and create those opportunities. And then, I don't think I can talk about UDL enough. I don't know if I mention it every week. I probably should. But just that idea that something that is required for some is good for many and should be available to all. In the old days, we would talk about something like typing. Some of my kids really have to type to be able to get their ideas out, but typing works for a lot of kids. And typing doesn't work for all kids. So don't force everybody to write unless it's a 5-paragraph essay and you're turning in your absolute final draft. Then you should have it typed double spaced, Times New Roman, as the English teacher in me. But you know what? For the most part, put them down there. I can turn it into Times New Roman and read it appropriately. But unless you're doing something specific like that, you shouldn't have everybody have to type all of their responses, but they should be allowed to if they can. And that goes beyond just typing. That's just usually the quick, easy example that we can talk about. My little one, I bought her a keyboard so she could practice typing, and then I had to tell her, no, honey, you actually have to attach it to your iPad. You can't just sit there and practice typing when it's turned off and not attached to it. But I mean, honestly, I would say that's a piece of it. I would say those of us who grew up in like late 90s, early 2000s, oh my gosh, the AIM generation, we learned to speed type. We learned to have fights over AIM because we didn't have texting. you know, our thumbs weren't quite as quick. We had the T9 or whatever, but we got really good at typing. These new students, these new kids who are digital natives are not typing natives. They are more of the cell phone, iPad kind of natives. And so they don't have some of those skills that we take for granted. Yes, oh my God, the chicken pecking. My dad did it. It's like the boomers did it, and now like the Gen Alphas are doing it too. Like they need those typing skills. Um, but I have also seen kids who would have their phones out and they could type an essay on their phone, which drives me bonkers. But you know what? If you want to type it on your phone and then I can take it over to Google and show you how to polish and edit, that's okay too. That is part of that flexibility piece that I think we want to see more of in these advanced courses. Teaching those communication skills. And again, this goes back to supporting the students around forming study groups, making study groups, following up with them. Also, just anytime, you know, there's a lot, especially in upper level classes, there's a lot of collaboration. And I don't know that all of our students really understand the value of that collaboration, but we also know that a lot of businesses and companies out there say that collaboration is one of the number one 21st century skills that students and graduates are lacking when they come into the business world. And so supporting groups in having those collaborative moments and coming together to come up with collaborative decisions, even things around timelines, deadlines, helping them come together with those pieces is a really important skill that our teachers can teach, that you don't need a special educator to teach. You might need them to reinforce it and you might need to break it down a little more, but that is something that can be built into regular instruction. Mindfulness and self-care. This one, I don't think, and I will say, this is one of the areas that IB is probably doing the best job with right now. I don't know if it has made it out to everybody, but there's been a lot of work on the IB side about reframing how we think about IB programming, because crying is not a part of the IB curriculum. Crying is not a part of the AP curriculum. Having breakdowns and needing to take days off of school because you're so stressed out is not a part of any of the curriculum, nor should it be. I think that that high pressure cooker feeling was very much indicative of what IAP was in the old days, but that's not, it's not good for the kids, it's not good for the teachers, and we really want to help them understand and feel that work-life balance. You know, it's important to study, it's important to take breaks. If we're helping a kid develop a study schedule, we need to help them develop a break schedule. And we need to applaud them for using it, because I think there's also that and I'm guilty of this too, the self-deprecating and the, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted, I haven't slept in a week, like it's a badge of honor. And usually, you know, A, it's not a badge of honor, and B, oftentimes when we say it, we are somewhat exaggerating, but the kids are taking it to heart. And so we really want to make sure that we are, you know, we place our own boundaries as well. Like, no, I'm not answering your text messages or your email at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Um, but you know, I will check it at some point this weekend just because you're working on a big project, and I'll make sure I make time for you, but I need time for me as well. And voicing, so just like any other Think Aloud, voicing our boundaries, voicing our breaks, and then voicing our expectations of doing our best and not trying to or hyper perfection ourselves over the top. Um, So I will say when it comes to, no, sorry, when it comes to advanced classes, note taking is probably one of my biggest pet peeves for why kids do poorly in advanced classes. Note taking is important, but when you have certain disabilities, note taking is either superfluous or damaging. And we need to get away from this idea that everybody has to take notes in a certain way. Most kids need to learn how to take notes appropriately. All kids need to learn how to use some type of system to gather and maintain information. But I will tell you, note cards, the schools that are still doing these note cards where you write what like flashcards in the old days, I still have schools who have literally failed twice exceptional students because they can't write their definitions on note cards. I don't know what writing a definition on a note card tells you, other than I am capable of putting my handwriting onto a piece of paper that is a 3x5. I did have one school tell me, well, we let the student use a 4x6 card instead. If we're at the point where our handwriting is so misshapen that we cannot fit our notes easily and comfortably onto a 3x5 card, having a 4x6 card, I appreciate the thought, not a way to succeed. We need to be more flexible with our kids. We need to teach different styles of note taking. We also need to think about things like when we have, and I own I'm bad at this for you guys, when we have our slideshows, share the slideshows, so that you can take notes on them as needed. There's different ways to approach this, and this is where, as teachers, we need to be more flexible with our students, because badgering them over a system that doesn't work for them is not going to help them learn the content, nor is it going to help them learn the skill. And so we really want to figure out both of those components when it comes to supporting our students. So some things I think that we are missing, especially in some of the new curriculum that are coming out, or even when we're in more self-driven curriculum like APIB, I think we're missing a lot of really good opportunities for student-focused and student-led learning. I wish I had time to go on about problem-based learning, but that could be a whole course in and of itself. But basically, the idea of problem-based learning is where you present students with an ill-structured problem that forces them to ask questions, that forces them to determine what next steps they need to take to do their research, that also then brings them back, because you do it in sort of almost a role play perspective, where they ask questions, they seek out the research, they come back, review the research that they have, ask more questions, go back out and bring it back. Initial setup takes a little bit longer, but overall you can do it in about the same amount of time that you do any other unit work in. And this is honestly one of those great places where you can use things like ChatGPT. I was playing with this idea the other day just to see what I could do, and I threw an assignment the teacher had given me into ChatGPT, and I was like, this is a really cool research project. How might I turn this into an ill-structured problem for problem-based learning? And it took some tweaks, but we came up with a really good way to get kids to start asking questions, which helps with some of that independent study piece. It helps with some of those other best practices. And when we teach the kids to be more independent and seeking the information out, it gives us as teachers more time to pull the students who need a little bit more support, because we're not always having to be at the front of the room directing all of the instruction. And so I think that those are opportunities, especially that our secondary teachers have, that our elementary teachers don't always have the freedom to do now. But learning about those best practices it's a really good way to go about providing more opportunities to support students during class. So I will pop this. I don't know if I did already. I'm gonna ignore the date on it too. And this should be shared with everyone at CPS. The next couple of slides that I have on here really go through, how do you think about different types of accommodations that we have on IEPs? So the first one we talk about is this idea of a reduced workload. So, you can go with a traditional approach, like, if you have 20 questions, can I do 10? Can I do 5? How many do they have to do to show mastery? If the problems increase in difficulty over time, over progression, can you give them the most difficult problem first? And then if they succeed, they've succeeded. And if they don't succeed, then we scale back to the part where they struggled and have them work on that concept there. For product-based, we might be looking at, okay, yes, 5-paragraph essays are important. They're not important, but people think they're important. Do I have to have a 5-paragraph essay every time? Can I have you focus on, having a really good thesis statement and a really good body paragraph, and outline the rest, and then build over time, so that by the end of the year, you're writing a successful 5-paragraph essay, but you might not be there in first semester, nor am I trying to torture you into being there in first semester. So just different ways to look at it. One of the examples I have from my AP class was I had a teacher and her expectation, and for the most part, all of the students wrote 3 different kinds of papers a week. They did a DBQ, a long essay, and a short answer practice every single week. I had a student who had a verbal comprehension ability up in the 130s, 140s, and a processing speed in the first percentile. Her processing speed was somewhere down near 70. It's a huge spread. Um, and it really mostly impacted her in writing because she was both dyslexic and dysgraphic. Um, and she also was a dual language speaker. And I did discover over time that if you read all of her assignments with a French accent, they made a lot more sense than if you just read them. I don't know why this is. And she did not have nearly as many problems in French as she did in English. She was also a native English speaker. I don't know. She's a very interesting student. I still love her to death. Um, the modification we made was that she did one type of writing per week, but she would outline the others over time. That was what we got to. We actually started with 3 papers per quarter. So first quarter, she only wrote 3 papers. Everybody else wrote, what, 9 times 3 is 27. Everybody else had written about 27 papers. She wrote 3. By the end of the year, she was writing 1 per week. Um, and even with all of that, and that long essay was over the course of the quarter, even with all of that, she still scored a 3 on the AP exam. Um, it's, I think, an amazing testament to what she was able to do. But it also took our AP teacher, and I was really proud of the AP teacher because when we presented her with the issue, she came back with this response and this plan. I didn't have to do any particular coaching for it. But it was a way that we reduced the workload and supported her. So same class, the teacher had them read usually 2 to 3 novels per quarter. Again, my student with this significant disability, A, used audio materials for everything. And so a lot of my time as a special educator, I was not co-teaching this class, but a lot of my time was spent making sure things were available in Bookshare, making sure things were available in a PDF to read to her. I spent a lot of time doing the modifications because I didn't need to do the instructional support in there. And I didn't have to actually co-teach the class because the AP teacher gave me what I needed. I did it during my work time, and then I sent it back to the teacher to use the materials. And then the student was also allowed to focus on 1 novel, and then we supplemented with related short stories so that she still had the experience of multiple perspectives, but didn't have to dig into 3 novels per quarter. Another example we had was the students were supposed to complete an end of unit study guide. Various responses for this one. But one thing I really liked was that the students were given a choice board and activities had different values, which we kind of showed, but they were also laid out by topic. And so the teacher gave every student a snapshot of what they had done during the unit, where they had struggled, where they had done best, so that the students could determine where they wanted to put forth their effort so that they could either improve their grade or improve their knowledge on areas that they struggled with. But they had that opportunity, and the teacher created this like kind of broad range project that could be held over multiple years, but kids could pick what they needed to do. And at the end of the day, he needed them to get to 50 points, and they were able to do a lot of that determination. And by having that pre-created choice board, he was able to use the same rubric for most of the assignments on there so that there wasn't a lot of extra work for him because he was looking for, understanding of content, just some of those different ideas, but the kids could pick the actual subject material. And then the other one that he had was, especially for students who didn't struggle in a particular unit, he had them do a deep dive independent activity where they got to research something of interest to them. Again, a 50-point assignment, but something that they could explore on their own and met their needs and didn't have all the little pieces that maybe a choice board would have. So we have some other pieces and examples in here that you can look through. And then some of this other information is actually changed. So I would not worry about anything on here. After starting with prepping for accommodations, this information has changed, so I wouldn't worry about that so much. So we have just a few minutes left. Um, I do have the course itself open until the end of April because I wanted to give you, one, it's spring break. And two, I wanted to give you guys time to really digest and dig into your work products. I don't know what's going on with that one assignment. It looks correct to me, but I will definitely check out. It's the template. Is that right for the Trellis and Bloom planning template?
Yeah, the template is just missing the part to put in like the whole class data. I see the individual student data and I see the template for the lesson plan, but the part where you put in the whole class is missing.
Okay. It's this part that's missing. Yes. When I said primary, it shouldn't say preschool. It should say pre-K to 2. That was probably an example of me being tired and not finishing my editing like I should have. Um, yeah, I'm going, let me see if I can go from here. Dashboard. I think the problem is what I keep pulling up is not the version I gave you guys. I gave you guys an updated version, and I don't know what I named it. That is frequently what I do. I try to be fancy and update things for you guys, and then nope, that's the rubric. That's not what I want. Okay, option 1, Trellis and Bloom, and the owner. Right. Oh, okay, I see what happens. I think it should have. Nope. There, I fixed it.
Thank you.
I will let everybody know. I definitely, shockingly, fell behind on the grading. I need to catch up. But one thing I try to do is when I'm done grading a category, I send a blast email out. Because Canvas lets you do that to say, and I just basically am like, hey, you haven't turned this in yet, which is usually when I get people responding saying, I dropped this class before it started, and then I have to go figure those pieces out. But yes, one thing I will do over spring break, because at some point I will need a break from the now 7 children who are coming with us to Busch Gardens. Yeah, I don't, only one of them is mine. So at some point I'm going to leave the children with other people's adults, and I will quietly go do some grading. I will catch up on attendance. And if I basically how it's going to work for attendance is you're allowed to miss up to 2 classes. So I will put in all the attendance I have. And as long as I have you in for at least 5 classes, then I'm not going to worry about it. If for some reason you're recorded as fewer than 5 classes, I will shoot you an email with the dates that I have you for, and then you can let me know if we mixed up anything. Um, Most of the time I know it's just forgot to click the link or whatever. Um, if you've attended all 7 weeks of class and as long as 5 of them are recorded, we're good. Um, don't be sorry you're behind. Literally, the reason, usually I set this class so it ends about a week and a half after, and this time I specifically scheduled a full month from when our class ended till when the grades are due. And that also gives them time to yell at me because I'm usually behind anyway. Um, but I definitely built that time in for you guys just because I don't know why this semester was like this, but somehow with when grading fell and when spring break fell, it was just it's a lot of time, so I wanted to give you guys time to get this assignment finished. No, that's not a problem. Don't worry about it. Sorry, I'm answering some of the direct questions as well as they're coming in to me. If you guys have concerns or anything else, email me and we can set up a time to chat. Speaking of break, I will be on spring break, like I said, so I will not answer a whole lot of emails, but I will do my best and I'll keep an eye out for you guys. I'll answer your emails. As long as you're not a parent, I will answer parent emails on spring break. That is a rule, that is a hard, fast rule in my life. But if you're a parent and you're taking this class, I'll answer questions about class. Otherwise, thank you guys so much. And if you ever need anything besides me posting the things I said I was going to post, please reach out to me, and anything I can ever do to help, I'm always happy to. So thank you guys again so much. Yeah, if you missed, make sure you just click on attendance and backfill that in for yourself. I can resend the link for attendance. And if you do need it, the attendance link, it is also on the class page. Yeah, I've added that one to my list of things I need to post, the resource slides. That will be my big project, was getting all of the slides shows up that I said I would.
Hey, Sarah, I have a question. Will you eventually stop the recording?
So what?
Are we still recording?